So today's topic is starting a business and let's make a plan. So to introduce myself, my name is Brent Hoover. I run the Aiken area SBDC here. Our office is officially located on USCA campus. And I'm sure each one of you who's tuned in is considering whether or not to actually start your company. So this is going to cover quite a few angles from that element. We want to go through some of the processes involved through startup assistance, but also too, I want to approach it from market research, a little from loan prep, and also too from a financial analysis standpoint. This is in conjunction with the Pacer Entrepreneurship Center, and I'll let Dr. Snella Portia say a few words regarding this. But here is what our layout will look like. So for today's agenda, because this is an SBDC event, we do have to actually tell you exactly who we are if you're not well acquainted already and what we can do to help your small business. Dr. Portia, as I mentioned, will give a brief summary of the Pacer Center and how this is a dual webinar in that regard. And then we'll get into, of course, the topic at hand, the startup process. We're going to cover this from the business plan perspective, and then as you see with the pro forma and the loan leverage, in case you do need financing from a bank. Last but not least, we will review. Now, as Carolyn has alluded to throughout this prelude, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to get to said questions at the end of the webinar. We want to make sure everybody is feeling well informed and also to appreciated of the fact that they have attended today's webinar. So let's go ahead and get started. So who we are as SBDC. Before COVID, we joked that we used to be South Carolina's best kept secret. So all we stand for is the South Carolina Small Business Administration, in this case, Small Business Development Center. No, we are not the Small Business Administration. People didn't actually misname us for that, but we are funded through the SBA. So what do? We offer no-cost counseling. That's the key element here. So because we are also paid employees for this, we do professional development, whether that's 20 to 30 hours, depending on our workload. And the main thing is we want to ensure confidentiality. Because there is no cost to that, people often wonder what's the catch. For that variety, we are funded by all levels of government, whether that's federal, state, and local for that variety. The main thing is we want to protect the confidentiality of the information that's being supplied to us. Now, because we are no cost counseling assistance offering, we do request metrics such as startup assistance, how many jobs you created, how much you got from a loan, how much you've increased sales. None of that's ever released individually, but we do aggregate said metrics, and our leadership team reports said metrics to Congress, thus ensuring that we remain funded as a no-cost service to the public. As you can see here, we have access to valuable resources. So what does that entail? We're going to see some of these things in regards to market research. That could be IBIS World, Vertical IQ, ProfitSense, getting access to market research reports that could cost you on the open market, say, several hundreds to thousands of dollars, and are being able to be supplied confidentially to you as a client at no cost. Not to mention, too, we have various workshops. That's why we're here today present. If you'd like to stay up to date on our list of events, you can go to scsbdc.com. You can see the training events tab, and you'll see not only the upcoming events, but you can also see recorded events such as the one that we have today. And we do have specialty programs. One of the key specialty programs that I'm involved with is the cybersecurity initiative. So essentially, Earl Gregorich, my colleague, heads up said task force, and we help clients get through basic cyber hygiene in accordance with the CMMC, or Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification 2.0 Level 1. Essentially, that's a nice term that's just meaning making sure that you're not a soft target out there for cyber hackers. So once again, all of these are available at, with that said, I'll turn it over briefly to Dr. Snella Portia, and she can discuss the USCA Pacer Center with the mission and vision. Dr. Portia?
Thank you, Brent. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our joint webinar. I am very grateful to the Small Business Development Center of State of South Carolina for allowing the Pacer Center to team up and really provide this valuable training opportunity for our aspiring entrepreneurs. At USCA Aiken, we created a Pacer Center in 2022 to actually stimulate activities of the aspiring entrepreneurs. Our mission is really to provide data-driven, unbiased and rigorous research that will enhance our state and the society around us, with the vision to provide opportunities for our students to engage in entrepreneurship activities, cutting-edge research and services. We hope that we can also be of service to our community. And again, in cooperation with South Carolina Small Business Development Center, we hope to actually help you achieve your future goal of starting your business. So Brent, thank you so much for allowing us to organize this webinar jointly, as many of our students are interested in actually seeing what we can have in works for them. Our vision is to aspire you guys to develop a business, your business, and actually to provide economic and business research to our area of CSRA. Thank you, Brent, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Portia. We greatly appreciate it. I have been informed there might be a slight lag between the video and the audio, so I may be turning off the video to ensure that we can have a smooth transition across this presentation. Now, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So we talked about startup assistance. The reason I have this image up here with the roadmap is because I'm hoping that you treat your business planning process as such. Now, sometimes, as they might say, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. You'll find that the destination you initially intended may not be the one that you actually end up at. But the idea behind the business plan is it is allowing you to see on paper what you proposed and what is feasible, and sometimes how you'll have to pivot. And we'll see the individual components that go along with that, because once again, this is treating it from the startup process. Therefore, I'm assuming most of you who are attending today's webinar are in the pre-venture element. Now, so we got around to the business plan, right? You know, part of this is actually getting in writing, and whether or not you consider yourself an avid writer for that case, I don't want the business plan to scare you. And so many times I see that the business plan is only created when you need to get debt financing, because as I mentioned on the slide, it's about tailoring it. You see lenders, you see investors, government contractings, but don't ignore the last two. And that is for you, the individual, and not to mention those that work for you. Because while a loan may require you to have a business plan, and let's say you decide, oh, you know what, I don't want to go with the loan. I'm going to do this self-finance. I'm going to bootstrap this. So you tend to neglect the business plan. Well, you're actually doing yourself a disfavor. Therefore, we want to consider what this plan is for. Now, granted, if we're doing this for a loan process, we want to talk to the lenders and say, which portions of the business plan are you focusing on? Is it the financial? Is it the market research? Is it the logistics? Same thing with our investors. The reason I have government contracting up here is, while that may not be a formal element, if you decide to get into the world of becoming a vendor in procurement, you might find that they require a technical plan. That technical plan is essentially functioning as a business plan, except for on the project base. And as I mentioned, this business plan is to help us as the individuals, but not to mention too, you have employees, and whether or not you have true W-2 employees, 1099s, volunteers, other managers in the company, you're still able to educate those who are working with you towards a common goal of where we need to be with the business. So like I said, you have to consider who is the quote unquote audience for this and make sure those specifications are there. I like to treat a business plan as that of a feasibility analysis. And essentially, if we had to break it up into 4 major tiers, these are what these tiers I would consider it to be. The product to service mix, the financials, the human capital, and the promotion. There's a reason the financials is in green. And I do want to stress this. And remember, this is just my own professional opinion. But when you're doing a business plan, the plan should probably be tailored around your financial forecast. Because without the numbers, the rest of it is essentially a dream. We want to make the dream a reality. Therefore, we need to have financing in place. That's one of those things we help with at SBDC. When we talked about our own scope of services, we help people build these business plans. So after today's call, you're like, hey, let's actually get on a one-on-one call for that. Great. But more importantly, we're probably going to focus on what's known as the pro forma or the financial forecast, showing either a lender or yourself what it's going to be required for revenue generation, say over 2 years, 3 years, perhaps 5, depending on when your business is expected to break even for that case. Hence why I've included it in green. But let's not forget that if you don't have something to sell, you're needless to say not going to get any money. Therefore, the product or service mix. If you're ever curious about an interesting model, one that is available out there in the public, it's a stage gate model that essentially helps go through what's known as an advanced design of the product or service mix, getting into product development or potentially the full scope of services. Now, that's one of those things too we also encourage businesses to look at, is how to price their product and or service. And that's one of the new models I've actually helped put together for my clients, is to appropriately price a service with based on their own owner's draw, the direct cost, the indirect cost, and also growing the profitability of the company. But in essence, with that business plan, we want to lay out everything that we are going to sell. What's the value to the customer? What's the pricing? How does that compare to that of our competition? Now, as you see, human capital, right? Of course, from a logistical standpoint, if we don't have people that are helping us get to the market and actually continue selling on the market, this is not going to be feasible at all. This human capital portion could be extremely small. It could be rather large. It depends on the scope of your operations. You could be a single member LLC. You're like, hey, I'm going to wear many hats as an entrepreneur. I'm going to be the salesperson. I'm going to be HR. I'm going to be finance, etc. Or you could actually say, well, look, I can't do everything. Therefore, I'm going to outsource some of these components, whether that's getting involved with just even having a CPA. If you've ever looked at Michael Porter's value chain, it breaks it up into primary and support activities. And, people tend to neglect, I don't have W-2 employees. I don't need to worry about human capital. Human capital also entails, do you know who your banker's going to be? Do you know who your insurance broker is going to be? Who's your attorney? Who's your CPA? And hopefully your consultant as well, as a sounding board for that matter. And last but not least is the promotion. Without marketing, needless to say, what we have that we can sell will not necessarily be sold. So marketing is about driving that element of value to the customers, and we're going to talk about that more in depth. But for right now, I want you thinking about these 4 quadrants, these various tiers, and how they are incorporated to the business plan. Now, all right, we're still in the feasibility game. So where do we need to get information from? So essentially, there's a twofold process that your business plan should probably incorporate: primary research and secondary market research. These are secondary market research elements. You see IBIS World, Vertical IQ, Profit Sense, and Esri. Now, for the first 3, we have access into these softwares. So what are they able to provide? Well, IBIS World is one of the more well-known market research on a national scale and with a touch of international component as well. Vertical IQ, they're roughly same on those cases. Now, what we're able to do, though, is pull reports based on your industry. But before we can do that, if you look over on the right side of the screen, we do need to identify your NAICS code, or codes, also known as North America Industry Classification System. They're 6-digit codes. With those codes, we can actually pull the reports, because in essence, when they are compiling all this market research, they are actually saying, all right, how do we group similar industries together? And they use this coding system. Now, understand certain codes are expired. And you will notice if you ever look through the census.gov or NAICS.com, you can find the codes for this. Once we have the appropriate codes of what you're selling, your types of industries, we can pull the reports. One of the nice things is we do have access into IBIS World, and they will sometimes do specialized reports, because sometimes we end up with NAICS codes that are too encompassing of multiple industries, and we want to specialize it down to a granular level, and we're able to do that with IBIS World. Vertical IQ allows us to see comparison in relation to what's going on with just your own area, and also to other key metrics such as business valuation, so we can able to see, based on your pro forma in year 3 or year 4, what your business might actually have in terms of range. Now, we do not do formal business valuation, needless to say. That is, you go to certified business evaluators, but it allows for the client to start thinking about where they want to be in terms of a range. And last but not least, we have Profit Sense and Esri. Profit Sense allows us to see, in this case, weekly updated information from existing businesses in that industry, and are able to look at key metrics, whether that's benchmarking everything as a percentage of income or as a percentage of total assets for the balance sheet. The Profit Sense is more financially geared. IBIS World and Vertical IQ allows us to see the major trends. Like, what's the growth rate in your industry for the past 5 years? What is the future growth rate in 5 years forward? How did potentially COVID impact the industry long term? Where is it in the life cycle? These are all the things that are impacting every business in that industry. And not to mention, too, if you've ever looked at a business plan template, you may see something called a SWOT. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and you may see like a 5 forces model that Michael Porter created. All of those SWOT and 5 forces, they give a large overview within these reports, so it gets you started, and then we can tailor that to your business. every last of those elements is focused more on the relation of jobs EQ. If we need to get local granular data on your industry, if you're saying, hey, I am selling my product or service within, say, 20 or 30 miles, we can get access to that. We do have partners that are allowing us to get access to said information, particularly here in Aiken. We work with Economic Development Partnership. They are also housed on campus at USCA, and we're able to get that local data if the client needs it. But please understand, this is secondary research. It is tailored towards the industry, but it's not necessarily tailored towards you. So one of those things I encourage businesses to do in the business planning process is to actually conduct primary market research. And we have a good competitive matrix template that we can show you, and I'm going to demo that in a upcoming slide so you can see how to compare your company versus others. Therefore, it still is all geared towards feasibility, whether or not we should enter the market to begin with. Speaking of the market, so there's really two ways you can approach this. It's what's known as the push and pull. A lot of businesses end up using the push strategy rather than the pull, because the whole idea is you have to figure out how well established are you in your industry. And see, there's something that could occur, as you might see on the prior slide. You might be like, well, I have trouble identifying a true NAICS code, and I look at the local data, and there's not enough of a sample size for me to reference my company against. In essence, you may be what's known as a blue ocean for that. That could actually be beneficial, because if you are established as a first mover, you come in with a valuable product or service, you're going to establish a strong market share and thus build out that industry for that local area. But most of the times businesses are going into a industry that is not emerging. It is established, the rivalry intensity is high, and therefore they most likely will end up using the push strategy, where it's an already established market. You're going in, you're just putting it out there. Here's what I have to sell. And you're trying to convince the customer to get it. I actually encourage the pull strategy, because the pull strategy essentially focuses on what I like to label the demand schedule. So many times businesses will go in, they'll look at the marketing on a business plan, and they'll say, all right, I'm going to get on social media. I'm going to get on Facebook. I'm going to get on Instagram, TikTok, etc. And just start putting my information out there and hoping that someone comes to me in that case. With the pull strategy, a lot of times you were looking to establish in the business planning process who those specific customers or clients are. When we're working with some SBA loans, we'll actually build out an informal demand schedule. Certain programs such as the 504 might want a feasibility analysis and say, all right, who are those potential clients? We might turn to businesses and get contingent letters of commitment and saying, all right, these are the people that are interested in what we're selling. And we're starting to size up who they are in an Excel database. We got client 1, client 2, customer 3, however you have a client or customer depends on. And then we're able to see, all right, what would that account for in terms of sale? And part of that's relying on good data modeling in Excel, and so how that ties into the business plan. But once again, out there, we really have to consider business from that standpoint. You are trying to convince someone to open up their pocketbook and give their hard-earned money to you in return for something. And when you really think about it from that strategy, business in terms of marketing becomes more difficult than you might realize, because everyone assumes that we're going to sell. Well, you may be the shiny new toy, like in the restaurant industry, coming out of the gate, but then you actually have to continue delivering value for that potential customer. But in essence, what I'm really trying to show here with the pull strategy is, in your business plan, can we actually lay out in a tabular format what you're going to have for your demand schedule? Like specifically who those clients or customers would be, size up what they're willing to buy the product or service for, and thus we're able to see what our potential gross receipts might be in that scenario. Now, I've been going on about the business plan structure, so I assume naturally I would put up a slide for this, and here it is. So we're going to work our way clockwise, and you'll notice it is a ongoing process similar to time. It never ceases, because the whole idea behind the business plan is it is an evolving document. It is not static. Evolving is key word here. Now, if you notice, we start with the executive summary. We work our way down to the company profile and the UVP. We have your industry analysis. We got human capital, scope of services, marketing, financials, and work our way into sustainability. Some advice out there will tell you that, you shouldn't write the executive summary until the end of the business plan. I tend to want clients to start at least a draft of it, because in essence, the executive summary is pulling from different things. Treat it like a resume. If it's 1 page or less, So I've seen some go into 2, but similar to that of a resume, you want to get the information succinct. You have to consider who you're writing the executive summary for. If this is for a lender, they're going to want specifics involved with that, right? A lot of times what I see in executive summaries, you start off with a interesting teaser for it, something about what you're offering for the market. You go segue into the market statistics. You talk about the financing that's needed to be involved, some of the key elements of value that we're going to show, what are potential barriers to entry, and then, of course, it transitions into the next categories for that. And yes, if you're wondering, we do have business plan templates that we provide here at SBDC. Some templates you'll find out there on the market, such as B plans, they may be rather large in terms of the number of pages on it and sections. Here's the one thing I always encourage. Once again, you tailor the plan to you. If a section doesn't apply, chuck it. If something's not even in there in the template to begin with, add it in. Because once again, we want to customize it towards our needs. Speaking of the company needs, we have here at the company profile and the UVP. The UVP stands for Unique Value Proposition. You will also hear it sometimes called Unique Selling Proposition, or USP. Once again, the terms are interchangeable. But essentially, this is establishing the basics. All right, who's in the company? What legal structure did we choose? Are we doing an LLC? Are we doing an S Corp? Are we doing a C Corp? Are we doing a benefit corp? Are we doing a statutory close? Under South Carolina, these are some of the structures that we can do. Perhaps you might even be operating as a sole proprietor or general partnership. But we want to list out the key elements of due diligence that are needed. What this company's going to do, who's in it, what's the structure, right? Do we need to get things such as an EIN number, which most business structures are going to require? Are we going to get a DUNS number? We're required to get additional permitting, say through DHEC, through the LLR, Labor Licensing and Regulations. All of these things flow under the company profile. A lot of times, too, I like to have a industry-specific resume for each of the key personnel that fall under there. Sometimes you can have in the company profile, sometimes we put it under the human capital, 2 ones down, but it really just depends on how you want it structured. But the unique value proposition is this, and I'll talk about it on a later slide. It's essentially saying, how are you going to be differentiated from that of your competitors? It's one of those things that sounds simple on paper, but when you actually try to commit your own to paper, it becomes a little bit more difficult. And sometimes you'll find that your competition evolves with you, and therefore your UVP has to evolve in order to remain relevant in the market. And we talked a lot about the industry analysis, right, in the third element. Once again, I'm hoping a business in their business plan incorporates 2 components, the primary research and the secondary research. Because if you work with us as a client, right, we're going to get you that secondary research. We're going to have IBIS World. We can pull Vertical IQ, Profit Sense. And of course, if we need to outsource something to get the Jobs EQ or the ESRI reports on the local data, we'll have all of this. We will have a strong picture as to what the market is involved on a national and perhaps state/metropolitan spectrum. But once again, the primary research is that on the customer. In that case, you have to consider, what does this customer want? What's going on with your own competitors? One of those things we suggest is you can look, in case of Google, you can look within, say, perhaps a 10 to 20 mile radius on the map. Who else is in that industry with you? Sometimes people will look and see, all right, who are the new chamber members? Some will even pull this from the local business licenses that have been issued. They will look to see where they can gather this public data and identify who are involved in the competition. Sometimes I encourage clients, if you're going to have a storefront, you got a competitor, go into the actual storefront, walk around, see what you like, what you dislike. A lot of this is trying to identify where you are strong and they are weak, and vice versa, and hopefully mitigating that. So we can help you, of course, with the secondary research, but there's going to be some legwork involved with you on the primary side. All of this still goes into the industry analysis. You want to be able to understand your customer. Now, when we talk about the UVP later on, Michael Porter asked one question inside of it to help prep a business. And he asked, why are your products being needed or desired? Because sometimes, you don't have a true necessity product. It's more of a want. It's based on, disposable income without ever customers. But it's not about what you're selling. It's understanding, why is that customer or client seeking your product or service in the first place? What utility or function of happiness are you allowing and fulfilling with your product or service. So there's quite a few things that go into the industry analysis. And with the templates that we provided, you'll see a lot of helper questions that I try to, get clients started with on these elements. But once again, it's looking at the market as a whole spectrum and then understanding how you fit into said spectrum. Now, once we've gotten through that, right, we can do the human capital and understand, while this is in a clockwise manner and we're assuming that we are going to go in sequential order, you can skip around. I mean, this is your business. Eventually, you're going to have to get to all of it for that case, perhaps if you're getting a loan. But once again, feel free to skip around. But we're going to go in, of course, sequential order here. Therefore, let's talk about the human capital. As I mentioned earlier, this could literally just be you with your outsource. Or it could be W-2 employees. There could be a mixture of W-2 and 1099s. There's so many different ways it could take. But here's the thing. If you're planning to have employees, list out the job descriptions, the job titles. There's a reason you want to find a uniform job title, because we can go to, say, websites like payscale.com or salary.com, and we're able to actually see what is the competitive rate for that position, given the prerequisites that you were desiring and seeking out of said job candidate. But also, too, if you have people committed, well, what is involved with their bios? Particularly if we're needing financing from a bank or trying to convince an investor to get on board with this company, we want to show them that you can have a great idea, as they would say, but, if you don't have a strong team in place to execute said idea, it's really not going to go the way you want. And therefore, the best qualified people that we can get on board with the company, whether that's as a member of the company or perhaps as an employee, this will benefit the company greatly. So once again, this could be extremely small, like one page, or this could be several pages. It really just depends on who are you seeking now, who's committed, and perhaps who do you need to get in the future. Now, naturally, we've worked our way down here to the product mix / scope of services. As I mentioned earlier, we want to detail out everything that we are selling. If you have a tangible product, treat this as, imagine like having an old catalog. What would be on there? Restaurants, treat it like a menu. With the scope of services, for those that are not requiring, they're not having to collect sales tax, therefore they're just doing something of value, perhaps, such as drywalling or painting, etc. List out everything that you're willing to do for that. What's the pricing structure? And a lot of it, as I mentioned in the 4 quadrants, particularly being that of the green financials, this is where it really ties into, because we're establishing what we're selling, but then we have to also understand from an empirical standpoint, what's the price involved with that product or service. And it goes back to the company profile and the UVP. What value is that bringing? And last but not least, how does that compare to the competition? Because once we have that in place, we can actually get around to the marketing element. Now understand, you can do a separate marketing plan. One of my colleagues, Robert Jones, for that element, actually will help you go through with a marketing plan. However, you can incorporate one in the business plan, and I strongly encourage you to do so. However, a lot of times when I see with business plans, people under the marketing section will make it vague, and they'll be like, well, I'm going to use social media. I encourage you to always go a step deeper. Okay, if you tell me you're doing social media, what specific portions of social media you're going to try to capture? If you're going to be on Facebook, you're going to be on Instagram. I also encourage clients to even go one step further beyond that and say, what's the unique mission? If you're just telling me you're on social media and you're like, well, I'm on there because that's the end thing to do, that's not a strategy. That's not an effective tactic. And therefore, you're kind of throwing things up at the wall and hoping something sticks. We want to be more precise with that. And therefore, understanding, all right, why are we on this platform and what's going to be involved with the actual specific tactics of that. It gets around to the 4 Ps. If you ever took a marketing class, I know that it seems like a joke. You got your product, price, place, and promotion, but I've actually asked some clients and some students in the past, can you answer those 4 basic questions? And occasionally they fail on not getting to all 4. But your marketing plan is built around the UVP. Okay. Whatever's in that value proposition, you have to consider every tactic that you're going to do from a promotional standpoint. Is it in alignment with that of the value that you're seeking to offer with your product or service? Not, you're actually contradicting your own efforts, and needless to say, it's not going to be as effective as you want. Now, if you see, of course, after marketing, we have financials. That's one of the things I specialize in. And I do a lot of data modeling. I put together templates for bank loans, whether that's something a micro loan of $50,000 or a multi-million-dollar SBA loan. Financials remain the same. We're looking at it from a startup perspective. How much to actually get this going? We want to look at the fixed and variable cost on a monthly basis to understand our operational cash outflow. How much do we need from a working capital buffer? How much do you want to pay yourself? And then we're able to use data modeling in Excel to see, all right, well, what's required to be able to hit the objective that you want from a financial standpoint. Essentially, I treated reading right to left, in essence. We understand the goal, the end goal of where we need to be. And then Excel data modeling tells us empirically, well, this is how much you have to generate based off of that. And then it comes back to the marketing plan. Well, how are we actually going to get that to be a reality? If data modeling says, hey, we need to have 100 clients per month. Well, once again, all right, the marketing says, how do we actually achieve that? So with financials, you'll actually have an Excel document in play for this. So when you hear about business planning, you'll essentially have two documents. You'll have your Word document when you have your Excel. Now, some clients and businesses are using LivePlan for this because LivePlan incorporates both into it. And for the most part, it's doing very well, in my opinion. But if we really want to get into the nuances of data modeling, we probably do need to work exclusively in Excel for that. Therefore, we can see everything that's generated. And a lot of times what we'll do in the business plan is once we've created our Excel portion, we'll go in the business plan and maybe use a couple of paragraphs to talk about the highlights in terms of, all right, here's what we need from startup, here's operational cost, here's what we need to achieve, perhaps a debt service coverage ratio of 1.2. That's getting in more in terms of the technicalities of bank loans. But we approach it from whatever the client or the customer needs. I will tell you, realistic cash flow sometimes looks very messy on an Excel document. If it looks clean, it's probably not realistic. If you're actually talking about the timing of cash flows and adjusting for seasonality, it's going to look a little bit more chaotic, and it will be a more accurate representation of what's going on with the cash inflows and outflows of your business. And last but not least, you see up on the slide is sustainability. Now, sustainability approaches it from two perspectives. One, we actually want to look at our desired growth. You know, where do you see the company at year 2, year 3? What new things are you bringing on board? Do we get a new location? Do we hire new people? Do we debut new products? The other side of that coin is that of pivoting. I like to call it a contingency plan. Particularly during COVID, so many of our clients had to pivot on a dime in order to not only sustain themselves, but also thrive. And some businesses actually found a way of, they weren't just surviving, they were growing. And therefore we want to see, all right, how do we reposition ourselves? I often talk to students and they'll ask, you know, what are some of the basic things a company needs? And I always preach cash, pivot, and proxy. Cash to have the working capital buffer, the proxy to ensure, like in the case of human capital, that you have someone who can be you when you're not there to be you. And therefore you don't get burned out because you are a human being and you have to make sure not only you have physical health, but also emotional health and well-being. But the pivot angle, how do we take what we already have, where we don't need to reinvent the wheel, we don't need to inject, say, $20,000 into new development. We just take what we already have and find a new market. And you'll find sometimes in those cases, they asked, I believe it was CBA Insights that did a poll on this as to why businesses fail. One of the most common reasons was there was no market need. And that wasn't that they didn't have a valuable product or service. Sometimes they're selling it to the wrong demographic. Because you may say, well, this is what I think individuals will need, or perhaps it's not. Perhaps you're actually looking at a B2B or business to business market. So that's one of those things you really want to consider in the sustainability section is how to pivot and what goes wrong, right? Because Murphy's Law is informally called a law, right? Because they say what can go wrong will go wrong. So a company has to be ready for that. And once again, I tied in the element of that proxy. When I mentioned cash, pivot, and proxy, goes back to the human capital element. You know, some businesses get business interruption insurance. They have the proper safeguards. They get key person insurance, or they simply have somebody on standby because they know, unfortunately, circumstances in life change, and therefore they need to be prepped for this. In essence, if you were covering all those facets, you have yourself a rather strong business plan because it goes into the logistics of how every day-to-day works, the people involved in those logistics, the marketing of it to the potential customers or clients, and showing how we're going to grow. Now, once again, the business plan, it's not a static document. And therefore, a lot of companies tend to neglect showing their employees sometimes their business plan. And I understand you don't necessarily want to show your full employees everything from a financial standpoint, but you want to be able to at least educate them and show them, all right, here's where we're going. Help me help you. So it's not just for lenders. Because a lot of times I see people do a business plan, they get it for a loan, they get the loan, and they're like, business plan's gone. Well, that's not the path to sustainability. It's not to growing. I want companies to be proactive. And essentially the business plan showing how you can be proactive, but sometimes when things like COVID arise, externalities, you are able to react and thus grow based on it. Now, I had mentioned, so we've discussed all the various components that a business plan incorporates, but we had talked about the industry analysis, right? There was two folds. There was secondary research, there's the primary research. With the primary research, you're able to do this. And sometimes when I have people submit loan packages, the lender may say, well, I'd like to see more detailed competitive matrix. So what is competitive matrix trying to do? This is going to help you identify value. Because I mentioned that thing called a UVP, a unique value proposition. How do we figure out what's on the proposition? Good planning tool, it's this. So with this matrix, it's not complex. You'll notice. In the case of each row, we have the companies. If you follow anything from a sports standpoint, such as say ESPN, you'll notice when two teams are rivals and they'll show, hey, this is how they size up based on yardage or how many points they allowed, etc. Those kind of things are the best way to approach it from that of you and your competitors. Now, when you see the attributes, right, those attributes, you do want to make sure that they are things that matter to the customer or to the client. That's why you're looking at that research in depth, because you don't just want to say, well, I think this attribute's important. Does the potential customer agree with that? Because if they don't care about it, it really should not exist on here. That's one of those things when we do more in-depth analysis on SWOT, that you get into the T's, the threats, we're trying to understand what's more of a weakness versus more of an external component that affects everybody in the industry. So this is why with a combination of the primary market and secondary market research, we can see what are those top attributes. And therefore we can say or grade ourselves versus that of our competitors. Where are they strong? Where are we weak? And vice versa. Because where we're strong and they're weak, that's what allows us to build out core competencies that we can put on the UVP. If we are unfortunately lagging behind the competition in something, well, we need to figure out how to mitigate it. In essence, it's particularly when I go to that of a lender or an investor with a client, I treat a business plan as a risk mitigation plan. How do we minimize the risk involved? Now, you can't delete the risk entirely in some cases. Eventually you hit a brick wall, right? You can only minimize it so much. Well, that's okay. But you are trying to reduce the risk factor as much as possible with your business. But this really allows you to see from a spectrum, all right, how well are we doing versus that of competitors? If you see areas that are missing, essentially those what a analyst would call a blue ocean with a term, that's where you can capitalize on it. And thus, once you figured out, all right, where we're strong and where they're weak, we can get into what's known as the UVP. Now, here's the thing. If you look at a textbook, you'll see Michael Porter's UVP, and it asks 3 questions. Who are your customers? What needs are you meeting? Meaning, why are they buying the product or service in the first place? And are you using a relative cost and relative price strategy? Now, that's the corporate UVP. That's something internal. Because here's the thing about marketing. If it sounds academic in nature, it's probably not going to be that effective out there. That's why I like to call what's known as informally the street UVP. The reason I called it the street UVP is this. Imagine if you were in Times Square, plopped you down right there, you turn to a random person there in New York, and you have to convince them in 60 seconds why to buy your product or service. You're not going to be using academic buzzwords like synergy. No, you're going to be focused on those key questions the corporate UVP asks. And so to reiterate, the corporate UVP is asking 3 questions. They're just internal. It's to help you actually put together the external UVP. Who are your customers? Why are they buying your product or service in the first place? And are you focusing on a relative cost or a price premium strategy? And combined with the last slide with competitive matrix, right? We're seeing where we're strong. We try to get to the street UVP. And with the street UVP, a lot of times I say, can you start off on bullet points? Can you do 3 to 5 bullet points of what is unique about your product or service? That's why it's called unique, those differentiators. So a lot of times you may just start with the value that your competitors have. So you might say, well, its pricing is unique. Well, guess what? Your competitors can lower their pricing, and thus your pricing is no longer unique. You have to go more in depth on that case. If you're struggling with writing this, take your phone, your iPad, any recorder that you can, start record and start talking about why you were offering this product or service in the first place. What do you see as the value? Just talk it out. Stop record, hit playback, and listen to that, because a lot of times you're going to find in that conversational tone what's needed to actually be put on paper. And that's what goes out to marketing. Now, you don't want to just put out a sheet with a couple of bullet points, right? But that's just to help you get started. That's why the marketing has the flash side of it. I'm always about the quality and the quantity. You can have the, let's say, strong graphic design that goes along with it, but that doesn't mean anything if you don't have worthy content that goes along with it. So you get the content first, then you flash it up, and then that's really what gets into marketing. But everything you do from a marketing standpoint, you need to ask yourself, is it in alignment with this value proposition? Because if it's not, you're just contradicting your own work. Therefore, we want to make sure that that alignment's there, and therefore your marketing is not going to suffer. Now, I like to use the analogy here of focusing on Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh was seen as the father of the West Coast offense in football. And when he was a professional NFL coach, he would script the first 15 plays. No matter what happened, he was going to commit to those plays, and he was going to have them down to a science. So I take two lessons away from this. Number one, a business should really practice out what they are skilled at. But two, I encourage this. There's a thing called in the business and on the business. When you're business planning, if you can, from a marketing standpoint, plan out at least 30 days worth of marketing material. The reason being is because once the rat race begins of you starting the company, you're not going to have as much time to focus on the strategic planning. You're going to be so involved in the inner workings of a business. Being an entrepreneur, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, it's not going to be necessarily an easy process. It's going to be time consuming. So therefore, if you give yourself a month head start, or 15 days to follow the 15 analogy, 15 to 30 days worth of material ahead of time, it allows you to play catch. You're not having to play catch up. You're able to simply be both in the business and on the business. And with marketing, that's where you're tied more into the tactics, right? Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, they're all going to go the way of the dodo bird. But the strategies behind it, the reason people want to buy your product or service is going to remain. Because at the end of the day, business is a human-to-human interaction. It's convincing somebody to give you their hard-earned money, and you are giving something of value that enriches their life. And that's really what a business plan is trying to do. It just uses the financial aspects of it. It uses the marketing and the logistics in order to make that a reality. And that's why I put earlier in this case with building out the business plan around the financials, because in essence, that's what's known as a pro forma. Sometimes you see pro forma one word, you see it two words, doesn't matter, it's interchangeable. The pro forma is within Excel listing out, here's the revenue we need to generate, here's all of our expenses, here's my withdrawal as a potentially an owner, what's going on with the net cash, and how are we growing the company bank account. I encourage companies to do this for 36 months worth out. And if you realize you're not going to break even to say year 4, let's do 4 years. Now, when it comes to really anything past that, we don't know enough about the world. It changes too much. I mean, if you ask someone what the world was going to be like in 2019, there's probably no way they would have come up with the conclusion of what happened with COVID and where we find ourselves now. So many things change on a dime due to externalities, but can we plan out at least 3 years? And that way we're able to see exactly how much you want to earn from this company, because you're in this process of pre-venture. This gives you the luxury of actually identifying, okay, how far do I want to take this company? Do I want to do this indefinitely till I retire? Some people are like, hey, I want to start this company, get it valuable, and flip it. That's great, but your plan needs to incorporate what's your end goal with this business. And so a lot of times, once again, we'll write the plan around this, and we'd be happy to help with this. This is one of my areas of specialty. Not only do I help with clients review business plans, but we put together the pro forma. We look at the startup costs. We look at operational costs. I don't even focus on revenue within the business plan. I have them just focus on the cost. And you might say, well, that sounds counterintuitive. It's not really, because Excel will tell me based on all the cash outflows, here's how much you got to generate in cash revenue. Therefore, we can work right to left, as I mentioned. And then based on your marketing efforts, your logistical efforts, we can see how do we make that a reality. Now, the main thing I have up here on sources is this. Every time you get a cost quote, get a source, because two things are going to either happen. One, you're going to come to me as a client, and then we're going to go through the pro forma, and I'll be like, all right, why'd you get that number? And you're going to be like, don't know. Or you're going to be doing this on your own, and you're going to be going through so many different cost figures that, say, a couple of months later, you're going to look at a cost figure and you're like, wow, I don't know why I came up with the conclusion of said number. This way we get all the sources. Because two, if we need to get a bank loan, we can show an underwriter, here's the empirical justification for each and every one of those cost figures. So once again, we're doing a mixture of Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel. Like I said, there's so many great tools out there in addition to that, like LivePlan. It's about what you want. But at the end of the day, those are just the tools. We want to focus on the strategy. We don't want to get lost in the weeds. We want to focus on the macro or top level. And that's what this company needs to be doing. And so if you do need to get into that of financing via debt with bank lenders, these are some of the things that we're going to consider because we do this on a routine basis. But your business plan, in essence, should be looking at all of these from various things. So you see the 5 C's, right? You've probably seen them around before, but I figured I'd put them out there up on the screen. The capital, the capacity, the collateral, the character, and the conditions. In essence, your business plan is probably going to either directly or indirectly cover these 5 components: the conditions, looking at the market elements of the industry, how you fit into said industry, the character. Not only is this tied into who you are, what's your credit score, but more importantly, like what's going on with your industry experience on that case, the people that are working with you, the collateral. In essence, a business is probably going to have a balance sheet. Well, as long as you're having that in place, you can see your assets, your liabilities, your equity. Well, what are those potential assets that we can use as collateral should we need to? Even if we don't need a business loan right now, we can see potentially what they could be. Because remember, the business plan ends with a sustainability section. And the capacity, once again, looking at that mixture between the capital, the financing, and what we can do from an operational standpoint. So these are some of the things that we can focus on further if you need this for a route. But for today's purpose, I wanted to cover the full spectrum. Now, I've got some startup checklist, guys, because, if we wanted to get into more of the granular aspects of the startup process, getting an EIN, filing the Secretary of State, getting a bank account, getting a DUNS number, working with DHAC, working with LLR for the various boards, we can do all of that. But I wanted to cover the top level actions and then see how that worked in with everybody who's on said call. And like I said, we're a no-call service. So if you have any additional questions that you want to cover on today's webinar, I'm going to get through any questions we have here. Here's my contact information. It's a way to sign up as a client. It takes 5 minutes to do. There's no cost. It's confidential. We'll get you in and therefore help you start achieving your business dreams.